guys, it's Rachel. I know that it is Saturday. My computer went down on Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday evening. I'd been out all day and came home and it had gone down. At present I am looking, I don't really know what. I haven't even had a shower today yet. I literally got up and took my girlfriend back to the station, so she could get home. And I've been trying to do some revision. Things are pretty hectic at the moment. I've got an exam in a couple of weeks and I've only just really today started my revision. So I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to get a video up or not. But I'm kind of glad that I have, because I think that today's topic is one that needs discussion, and I know it's one that we've had a couple of times before here on the channel, and it's really looking at circumstances which can negatively affect your eating disorder, or even circumstances which aren't necessarily negatively affecting your eating disorder, but are making things very, very difficult. And in that, we're specifically looking at when you are either living at home with parents, if you're living with roommates, if you're living in halls, if you're living with a partner, whichever it is. And I think that even if there isn't an issue with regards to a relationship being abusive or what have you, sometimes just being at home is a very, very difficult thing in itself. My home environment is an incredibly supportive environment. It's one that has always been that, but that doesn't mean there hasn't been conflict over the years, and that there hasn't been conflict especially when I was really poorly. So that environment in itself, although incredibly helpful and was trying to move me forward, became an environment which was very difficult to live in, because I just kind of wanted everyone to leave me alone. So I think it's kind of important to cover all aspects of the spectrum, that it is, you can be in a place whereby you do have support at home, but it's very, very difficult to be living at home. When I say home, can that refer to like a broader spectrum? I've got to think about that word tonight. In terms of home being a place that you are living with a partner, with somebody else, with your family. So initially I kind of want to start off with the basic, which is basically being in an environment where you are living with another person or a group of other people, and you are either suffering with your eating disorder, in recovery from your eating disorder. The dynamics there can be incredibly difficult, and it can be very hard for not only the sufferer or the person in recovery, but also the people who they're living with. One kind of theme that came up with me kind of time and time again, and I know it comes up with other people, is this difficulty in measuring an expectation, or measuring what a recovery is. So for a sufferer, for example, can be trying and actually feel that for the first time in their recovery they're in control of some of that they are working on some of their issues, that they're attending therapy, that they are actually eating themselves, that although they might not be eating completely enough, that they are eating, that they are trying to move themselves forward. And then you can have the frustration of the person who lives with you. Now it's going to depend as well on who you're living with, because obviously dynamics within a family, mother, daughter, or roommate and friend, or girlfriend and boyfriend, or girlfriend and girlfriend, boy, whatever, there's going to be different dynamics there. But that can be something whereby a person who's struggling feels like they are trying incredibly hard to work on their issues, work to recover from their eating disorder, and the person who they're living with feels that there needs to be more, because, and that doesn't have to be a negative thing, that can be because they care so much. So for example, I can use the situation with my girlfriend, which I do use quite a lot, in that she is taking a huge amount of responsibility for herself with her food, and yet I still push, and it does cause conflict. I don't think that necessarily has to be a bad thing. I think that we need to be able to accept that there is going to be that conflict, because if you are challenging a person with an eating disorder, it can be very, very difficult. And I think it has to be there. I think there has to be boundaries on both sides, and I think according to the relationship you have, you learn as you go along. So, you know, with my recovery, with my family, there were times when there was conflict because my mum would challenge me or would try and push me in a different way that I didn't feel comfortable with, but then ultimately that was a positive thing because I needed that. Other times it was too much and it caused conflict. And I think that when you're living with somebody, you really need to almost set some kind of ground rules or boundaries. So for example, with my mum, there was an understanding that she would support me, there would be an understanding that she would try and help me with my meals, and it's the same that I do with my girlfriend, that when we're together I try and cook the meals, I try and encourage her to cook with me. But there is an understanding between us as we go along of what feels okay and what's reasonable, and that if I was to suggest something that I could persist to a point, but that there was a boundary with that. Also that she knows that there's an expectation that she does need to eat a certain amount or try and eat a certain amount. And that's what you're going to do when you're in a situation where you're living with somebody. If it is maybe a roommate, maybe initially when you are living with that person, that you can kind of say, well look, this is kind of where I'm at, this is where I'm trying to move to. And all of this assumes that you can take a lot of responsibility for yourself. So I guess in making this video, I'm saying to you, you need to be able to take this responsibility. You need to be able to work on or be in the process of communicating with the person that you're living with, because what causes the most conflict, what causes the most difficulty is when there is no communication. So in terms of living with another person, whoever that is, there needs to be a degree of communication. And I think that if you are living with somebody, it is only fair on them and also on yourself that that communication is there, that you can say, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm trying to do, and I would really appreciate it if you could support me in this way. If there is conflict, that again, there's communication around that, and that is my key word, and it is a key word throughout recovery. And when people go silent is when the problems come, and when people don't talk about what's bothering them is when the problems come. And what that often leads to is an ultimatum, and where a person will say, you do this or you get out, or you do this or we can't be together. What it has to be about is you expressing how you feel and expressing your needs, and that other person say, well, this, you know, what would help me in this situation? Say if you're living with a roommate, that she says, well, how about we try and have dinner together, because you are my friend, I do care about you, I am going to worry about you, and what I feel I could offer is us maybe trying to have dinner together. And it's that kind of compromise, and it's about respecting one another, and it's about you respecting where the person who you care about is as well, with regards to them seeing you struggle with an eating disorder. And this is where support groups come in, this is where these videos become supportive, because we learn to understand that perspective. We learn to understand maybe where our mum, our friend, our boyfriend, our girlfriend, our sister, or whoever is coming from, and kind of feel like, well, actually, I want this person to be okay, and these are the emotions that I've got with how much they're struggling at the moment, and this is how I would like to support them. And we can then play that back to ourselves and say, okay, we've got a person in our life who is trying to do the same thing. And certainly when you're living with somebody, there has to be boundaries, and there has to be a mutual understanding, there has to be mutual respect, because otherwise it will end up in a climax, and that will either end in disaster, and someone will there has to be that interaction, there has to be that responsibility on probably both sides. More, I'm going to put it more so on you as the person in recovery or who's struggling to communicate, because by running from it, by not communicating any of it, the problem's just going to get worse and worse and worse till we get to the point whereby not only can you not stand living in that environment, the person who's living with you can't stand that environment, and all that's going to do is manifest itself in you using more behaviours. So I'm not saying that communication is easy, it's something that's been very difficult. I've lived at home, I'm still at home at the moment, throughout my recovery there's been periods which have been a complete nightmare, and it has meant me sitting down with a therapist, with a friend, whoever, and saying, right, this is a boundary I need to set with certain members of my family, because this has to be enough, this has to be good enough. And that doesn't always include food or eating or the eating disorder. It's about effectively communicating and improving those interpersonal skills and having a dialogue with the people that you live with. It also means being honest, I guess, and if there's dishonesty there, it does make it even more difficult, because if a person doesn't know what you're struggling with, it's very hard for them to support you, which then can build resentment with you. It can build a distance between you and them because they don't feel like they can help you, they feel helpless. And so with regards to a situation which is a non-abusive environment, and is actually an environment where 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, a family, whoever, are trying to live together, but that's what it's got to include, and it's got to really include the other people in the house as well. So for example, when my brother was still living here, the communication has to be a whole thing, and don't shut yourself away from that. Try and be brave, try and find courage in being honest with the people around you, and with how much you're struggling. The other circumstance that people can find themselves in is an abusive relationship, and that can either be family or it can be in a relationship. Even some friendships can be incredibly destructive. You could be very good friends with a person but be living together and you're both suffering from an eating disorder, and again, you're going to need to communicate. You're going to have to, one of you is going to have to take that step to say, do you know what, I'm actually finding this really hard that this is happening. This can happen when you live in halls or when you choose to live with a friend in university, whatever that circumstance is, and the environment itself is actually worsening things for you because you're both struggling with an eating disorder, but you've got a friendship there that you want to preserve, so you kind of avoid the conflict. And that happens in my relationship with my girlfriend. I don't want that conflict, and so I have to step back and think, okay, this might cause conflict, but at the end of the day, I know that that's what I need to do sometimes, is challenge her, is to bring something up which sits uncomfortably with me, and I have to be prepared for the fact that it might cause conflict, and it might cause conflict with whoever you try to talk to, but you have to be, really kind of courageous with that, and dare to kind of say, do you know what, this is still really difficult and I'm really struggling, and do you know what, I need your support, and if you can't do that right now, maybe it's not best that we're around one another when it comes to food, because this is triggering me or that is triggering me. When it comes to family, there can be an awful lot of conflict, especially kind of mother-daughter, son, mother, fathers, that kind of relationship when it's people's children. There can be a huge degree of frustration. That frustration can be normal, like I kind of mentioned earlier in the video, but also it can be very destructive. A lot of people who have eating disorders have parents who either have addictions or eating disorders or other mental health problems, which can mean that if you are of an age where you're still living at home, or even if you can't, I mean, I'm 30 and I'm still at home, I've not been able to afford to move out. It varies, and if you are in that position, it can be very, very difficult, and I'm going to be honest with you, there isn't actually always an answer to a situation whereby you're perhaps living with your mum and her partner, or your mum and dad, and your mum has an eating disorder, or the family members have an eating disorder, and it becomes very, very tense and difficult environment. Emotions tend to be incredibly intense and high, and it can be very destructive because you use behaviours more and more to deal with it. And the only advice I've got with that is again to try and talk to somebody about it, whether it's a therapist and get some advice from that, whether it's by watching these videos, and also by talking to people who you think will understand. I know a lot of people are involved with BEAT in the UK over here, and they kind of communicate with one another, a lot of the BEAT Young ambassadors. People gain support from people in different ways, because you end up meeting someone or talking to someone who's got a similar home situation to you, where maybe your mum has an eating disorder, and you can help one another exchange ideas on how to deal with that. You might have a situation whereby you have moved into halls and there's another person there who has an eating disorder, and you will find common ground with people, so that's the advantage of communicating your situation with different people. There are no easy answers to dealing with living under the same roof as somebody else who has an eating disorder. It does take a lot of time and energy, and it takes a lot of courage in being able to communicate effectively, and that's my biggest piece of advice, and it might seem like the most obvious one, but that's my advice, is to try and effectively communicate. and that can be through written, that can be by sitting down and talking, that can be by you writing a list of things that you're struggling with, and it's about setting boundaries with people and about helping build mutual respect. Okay guys, I'm going to go. I'm boiling. We're having like a heat wave in October over here. I'm going to try and get this video up, so I'll see you next week. Okay, bye.